welcome to the event, The Conversation on Brahminical Patriarchy. This was put on by the Radical South Asian Collective, a club started last year to address the kind of lack of conversations about gender and caste in the South Asian and especially South Asian American community at Penn. Previous events we've done are on South Asian sexuality. We brought speakers to the Gidla, and we'd like to thank our partners for the event, Patch, SAC, Oracle, Billy Cappy, Spectrum, Page, and the Penn Women's Center.
And so a little introduction on this event for our speaker is, so Dr. Suraj Yengde is a renowned scholar and activist and the author of the bestseller Caste Matters. The book discusses topics such as Dalit love, caste relationships to capitalism, and a call to action for folks with caste privileges. Dr. Yengde is India's first Dalit PhD holder from not just the University of Witwatersrand in Johannesburg, South Africa, but from any African institution. His global influence can be observed in the Huffington Post, BBC, The Hindu, The Mexican Times, The Citizen, Guardian Africa, and so many more places. Currently, he is an inaugural postdoctoral fellow at the Shorenstein Center on Media, Politics, and Public Policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. At Harvard, he runs a monthly Ambedkar lecture series, consults government and non-governmental institutions, and subject matter related to human rights, social justice, and cross-border migration. He is also the organizer and contributor to the Dalit Film Festival and the India for Diversity movement. And he's here predominantly today to talk about the intersections of caste and patriarchy.
Thank you. I think I'll stand so I can connect to the people at the last. So thank you so much for organizing this. First of all, I would like to thank Tanya and Kamal. I think we should give it up to them for really putting this together. Thank you. And also to the partners who have very enthusiastically cooperated and put this together. In her absence, I would like to also mention Meghna, who was an alum, and she actually was the one who put us in touch, and she was very enthusiastic that I go to her alma mater, and I think this is an outcome of that. I would also like to acknowledge a few friends and comrades in the audience for their work, as well as for their contribution to the movement. Partho, thank you so much. Ishani, Amia, Subair, we have had an excellent evening. Samip, who is from SADA, and Nick Maman, who is now at UPenn, who was with me at Harvard. Thank you, and thank you everybody for showing up. Before I begin this lecture, I would like to remember and salute the grandmothers, the mothers, the sisters, and the daughters of India right now who are standing guard against the casteist Brahminical regime who is using every language of fascism to implore any kind of violence upon the civil rights as well as human rights of the Indian citizens. And I think it's to their credit who have actually given a shape of this, what I would imagine, a rightful fight against the Brahminical Hindutva that we have in our current times. I would like to shout out two very important women of our current times, specifically in India, Radhika Vemula, who is the mother of an orphaned social movement in India. She is guiding with her passion and compassion, as well as she is leading almost single-handedly without any organizational support or anything of that sort to give us new directions. Her son was someone who humanity has been, has lost an important asset that would have probably contributed much more in the lineage as he was imagining, Carl Sagan. And again, I would like to imagine what a mother, Fatima, must be going through since Najib. We're still asking, where is Najib? And I think these are the two mothers, the mothers of our all movements, who continue to inspire and enlighten us. In addition to this struggle that we are actually facing in contemporary times, if you scratch the history books, almost dating back 3,000 years, it's not that different. The motifs have changed, but the other, the reasons of existence and reasons of fight continue to be the same. And we will go through some of this anecdotal as well as in evidentiary citations where we can. Then let's dig into it to find out the inspirations as well as some of the hesitations we have to call out what we have, the elephant in the room, Brahminical patriarchy that continues to operate in every one of us. Doesn't matter gender, doesn't matter caste, doesn't matter class, doesn't matter region, as long as one is devoted to suppressing the desires as well as the independence of a genderized female body, continues to be participant of Brahminical patriarchy. And I think when we try to understand what Brahminical patriarchy is, Brahminical equals patriarchy and patriarchy equals Brahminical. They are not different. Brahminical as a segment which evidently comes out of the tradition of post-Aryan invasion into the hinterlands of India, especially North India, and then coming downwards, where we see the Rigvedic foundations of India's theology, as well as the social as well as political aspect, continues to endorse Brahminical patriarchal sensibilities so strongly and so effectively that it co-opts with the ruling state and makes it a law of the land for so many centuries. And yet over the years it continues to be revisited again and again to impose and to discover new challenges for every moment of women liberation. Continues to bring new formulas under the name of religion, under the name of society, under the name of tradition, and again in the American context, if we see today, under the name of culture. Try to put down every other projects that will liberate women from the thraldom of any kinds of violence, more importantly, the Brahminical violence. And when I was thinking about this text, I wanted to say, I wanted to acknowledge fellow men in this room and the sinners in this room. The sinners being women, as described in the Vedic times, where women were not given authority. They would not have access to Vedas. Manusmruti's chapter 9, verse 5, explicitly talks about the inaccessibility of women to even learn Vedas. Vedas was a moment for one to claim superiority as well as purity. If you are able to master Veda, you become Brahma. You become the supreme knowledge. You become someone who can command and control. But Manusmriti gives an effective doctrine. It says women cannot have access to Vedas because they are born sinners. And because they are born sinners, the chapter is closed. Let's not even discuss the merits of its accessibility or inaccessibility of this text. And through this variations of putting down women in every way one sees, it becomes a very heteronormative, sexualized discourse that comes forward, which tries to confine the independence of women's autonomy. Now, just before we go deep into it, as a little bit of general knowledge check, raise your hands if you remember the incident of Nirbhaya that happened in New Delhi. Raise your hands if you remember the incident that happened with Priyanka Reddy in Hyderabad. Raise your hand if you know a 6-year-old girl was raped in UP 1 month ago. Raise your hand if you know a place called Madgaon in Gujarat, Modasa in Gujarat. And there was a rape a few weeks ago. Raise your hand if you know Sureka Bhutmange. And I think this is the impact of Brahminical patriarchy operating amongst us. That we do not know the cases which belong to the lower or Dalit caste women. Sureka Bhutmange was brutalized and killed along with her children by the landlord caste in Maharashtra in a village called Khairlanji in Vidarbha. Sureka Bhutmange, her refusal to give up to the patriarchal as well as casteist dominance by the landlords was taken as an affront, and how could a woman challenge and stand up for her rights was taken as a big assault on the casteist male pride. She doesn't coast down, she goes to police station, and again the police plays a dirty game, and she's not part of the cases are not registered and the police is not doing investigation. When she returns back, she hopes to get a justice through available state apparatus. State fails her. When she comes back, she's brutally killed. Rods and sticks are put into private parts of her and her daughter, and this is being seen spectacular to the son, and son is tossed into air, and he falls, and it's a gory incident that is described in a book by Anand Teltumde, who has written The Persistence of Caste, where you can find out the on-ground realities. Another incident, two sisters in UP who are basically land laborers. The parents are working on the same land. They think working in this farm is not paying them enough, and the wage is not compensatory. They ask for a 3 rupees rise in their wage. That amounts to their rape and eventual murder. This is the kind of casteist, patriarchal foundations that the caste society has given us. And that's why when we even attempt to disclose the naked realities of Brahminical patriarchy, more often than not, one usually masks this as this or that issue, either caste or class, either caste or gender, either caste or state. Dalit women continue to be suffering against the forces of caste, class, gender, and the state. And these are the 4 important indicators in the life of every person who is oppressed in any society if they want to seek liberation. Now, one of the fundamental aspects of Brahminical patriarchy is how it legislates and controls the action. In the Indian context, there are 5 major institutions that play important part in imposing Brahminical patriarchy. First is family. Second is parents. Third is marriage. Fourth is reproduction. Fifth is the sexual control of the bodily fluids of women. When a female child is born, and I'm going to read some of the laws, so we can follow on how the historical legacy continues to operate amongst us. In a caste society, if one has to regulate caste, regulation of caste in a disordered society is a very difficult thing. You can't have 7,000 plus subcastes operating in a society, yet call it a foundational nation, or yet call it something of a mythical state. You need something that is beyond laws. You need something that is beyond religion. You need a proper enforcing regulation that can regulate this horrendous system in what so-called peaceful, diversified Indian society. To do that, what we have done is we have mastered a technique of hiding the real purpose of oppression and instead use alternative techniques and as well as misadventures to define what an oppression of a woman or an oppression of a Dalit looks like. There is no straightforward answer. If in a caste society, if a woman is considered independent, that is a threat. And that's why women were considered always the sinners. This was very important when I was reading, where they were saying that, actually I wrote it down here, Yajnavalkya, one of the Vedic sages, says, and I quote, if the wife, again, it falls into the idea of the husband-wife binary, is habitual drunkard, a confirmed invalid, a cunning, a barren, or a spendthrift woman, if she is bitter-tongued, if she only has daughters and no son, if she hates her husband, then husband can marry a second wife, even while the first is a living. Now let's unpack this. Let's go to the bottom, at the very end. Marry a second wife even while the first is living. In many instances, you couldn't marry a second wife. You needed, in a strictly monogamous relationships, to regulate caste society, you needed only one person. So if a person wants to marry second wife, most likely he murdered the first wife. And these murders went under the norm of suicide, or she got burnt while cooking the food, or she went to draw water from the well and she just slipped her feet. She never had that so far, but now she's just gone into it. So there were various Dalit, various women, not Dalit, any women's murders committed by her husbands were written down as something, as an act of nature, or something she was just tired and she committed suicide. If we flip the role of, instead of wife, if we use husband, and if we try to change the balance of power, and if we read that again, if the husband is a habitual drunkard, which is true, a confirmed invalid, a cunning, a baron, or a spendthrift man, if he is bitter-tongued, if he only has daughters and no son, if he hates his wife, then wife can marry a second husband while the first husband is living. Now this framing and changing of alternative roles of women was not given. So what about a woman who wants to exercise an autonomy in her own body? An independent, autonomous, and confident woman is an atom bomb to the Brahminic Vedic system. To not have the independence, to not grant her the confidence, and to confine her independence upon a dependency where, according to Manu, chapter 9 again, I go back to this. Where they, right. Women must be particularly guarded against evil, however trifling they may appear. If they are not guarded, they will bring sorrow onto families. And then the important thing goes. Woman, chapter 9, verse 3, her father protects her in childhood, her husband protects her in youth, and her son protects her in old age. A woman is never fit for independence. And I think this is the guiding principle for many of the oppressive regimes that kind of came about through the system. Now in family, let's come back to the contemporary times. When one is born into a certain Indian family that practices certain faith, they're actually coming into a family that is conditioning the behaviors. The pronouns are already granted, and the role of a woman is already destined. You can't break those regulations and norms, and if you challenge the question, you are a woman who is bitter-tongued, who is asking too much questions, who cannot transcend. You should just limit. We can't expect more than what is happening. Similar instances are used when a Dalit asks questions to his or her parents. You're asked to be confined into the spaces. You're not asked to be dreamed more than what you have. You can just expect a job of a mid-level. You cannot expect to be someone who can excel in the services or contribute new inventions and be a new scientist in a new field that we have. With this family as a structure, caste remains protected. Because to protect caste, you need the so-called mythical idea of purity. Caste is nothing but the purity of bloodline. You inherit the caste, and for you to continue into that caste, you need to be pure into the same caste. If you, quote, contaminate with another caste person, and that could be person beyond your immediate lineage. Even you could be Brahmin, but amongst different subcaste, you're still contaminating the purity line. That's why the Gotra, we're identifying the lineages to continue to impose this kind of practices. And so for caste to be regulated, woman needs to be put under surveillance because she is a threat to a caste society. And why she is a threat? Because she has every reason and every reason to break through the caste system, because that's not granting her any kind of freedom. And two, she can then reproduce someone that will not fit into the caricatures of caste system. That's why she is constantly policed. And Ambedkar, in his 1913 essay, Caste in India, describes the idea of surplus woman. When out of the, especially there were child marriages, it's only stopped now, it still continues, but child marriages are very young, 7, 8, 9, and you are already married. By the certain age, the husband would die because the husband is always twice the age or more than that. And due to the age differentials, the husband would die, the woman will be there, and that woman is surplus woman because husband has died. Why is she surplus? Because according to the caste diction, she cannot marry. She cannot remarry, and she cannot even try to, reproduce with someone else. Because if her husband is dead, she is dead too. But in order to control and regulate that, they introduced two systems. One was sati, and the other was widowhood, where if you are a widow, you were given a specific marker. You had to shave your head and wear a certain type of sari and live as an outcast outside the society. Your life was a hellhole for the rest of the time you live. And for that, they called a spiritual act. You're now trying to reach to the God because your husband, your Lord, has reached to the God. With the sati, you had to basically jump as to show a loyalty to your husband. Now, the woman's sexual prowess is a threat to any male-dominated society. Her orgasmic control and as well as her transcending power is something that is a threat to male orgasmic powers. So in order to control that, the males, especially the Indian male society, had created that when you are married to someone, you expect the person sat janma, 7 lives. So you are actually taking a commitment from the woman, irrespective of a wish, that you would like to have me as your husband for the next 7 lives. That is again falling into the karmic theory of when I will be reborn, I would like to be born as such. Now, within the Manu Shastras, in the Manusmriti, the way it was described is, the man is reborn into his wives. That means he has to make sure, because if under the karmic theory, if you want to reborn, you better be reborn as a man. You don't need to be born as a woman or a girl, because if you're born into someone who is not a man, then again you are a curse to the society. And as we see through various religious interpretations of this text, what it did effectively was it asked the man to treat the woman up to a level of reproduction only. So if reproduction is central to how we regulate the Brahminical structure, the patriarchy follows into reproduction of caste. Because if you have to reproduce, you better reproduce within the same bloodline, within the same purity. Now what about the heterosexual coupling and the non-heterosexual coupling? How would that fit into retention of Brahminical patriarchy? I think the non-heteronormative practices are anti-Brahminical patriarchy. And I think those need to be those come out as a modern form of protest. Irrespective of the celebration of homosexuality in the Indian past, irrespective of the celebration of transgender bodies in the past, yet we see how reproduction was constantly fitting, and we sold it under a ideological dialogue of it being a conservative orthodox dictum. It was not conservative or orthodox, it was even heterodox. It was constantly, it was very prominently practiced amongst these strictures. The second important institution is this about parents. Our parents are the teachers of casteism. They are the best teachers who teach us how to practice caste, and they are the best teachers who regulate the structure of caste in our everyday lives. They become the poisonous snakes within our own lives who teach us about the negativity of the caste system. Under the metaphors of respect and reverence to parenthood, what they do is they bribe you and they rob you out of your own independent choices. They want you to be devotional because they have sacrificed so much. The parenthood grants limited autonomy for one to be independent up until going to school, going to colleges, selecting your profession, not beyond that. From childhood, specifically in India, I don't know how it operates here, I've been told in America, especially among the diaspora kids, diaspora families, it is continuing to happen slowly, especially within the diaspora circles, where who you hang out with, who you make friendships with, how do you practice this, is constantly being policed by the parents. So parents effectively become the caste police in our lives. And when we try to reason with them, they respond in a refusal about something that you're trying to enlighten them about. And this has been a constant experience across the board. When you've been trying to explain to them that these are the ills, you cannot just talk about this in such a, in such an out, they almost overpower you in almost every other conversations by saying this has always been the case. This is how the religious scriptures say. And when you try to challenge the religious beliefs as to how the religious beliefs produce certain forms of oppression on the bodies that are not amongst us, who are somewhere outcasted, then they have a different reasoning where they try to play it under the form of culture and as it has always been the case. Parents, after tutoring us how to be best casteist, we are then now presented to the exploitation of sexuality market called marriage. The childhood training is given for you to prepare for that moment. The hyper-capitalist celebration of marriage is overarchingly present in our lives, so much so that we are looking for that specific day, that special day. And the whole celebration of the De Beers Diamond Company and the aesthetics of the market culture that comes into power playing of marriage, where state becomes complicit as well as an active agent who can even enter your bedroom into your private practices as well as your private moments, because marriage grants the right to three segments. One is family, second is society, and third is state. Those three now can pass dictums, the dictats, they can pass their verdicts, and they can even judge you for whatever you do. And marriage is certainly considered in these days only to be monogamous. Anything otherwise is cheating, or it is discouraged from wider society in very much different circles. And state actually participates in encouraging this form of practice. And the society then conditions the so-called monogamous forms of relationships as someone that one has to live throughout the life. The divorce in the context of which I will read very soon, is actually a sin. A woman is not allowed to divorce. She cannot be divorced. She cannot ask for divorce. She can be rejected by the male, which is acceptable, but she cannot initiate the process of asking for her own independence. And that's why many of the radical rethinking of these traditions come into place in a very subtle ways. Now, when marriages, we think it is mostly heterosexual marriage. Why is it heterosexual marriage? Because it is normalized in a way where, for example, in 1990s, queer theory talks about, especially scholars like Leslie Cohen, who brings out that any form of a revolutionary project has to deal with the aspect of family and how this family is then tied to the class interest. How we're participating in reproducing the class tensions by falling into the trap of marriage market. Because this heterosexualized narrative is then asking us to reproduce, because if a woman, especially in the Indian context, is not bearing a child after 1 year of marriage, her in-laws and even her parents start torturing her. She has to undergo all kinds of wild gazes as well as disrespectable, more than disrespectable, she has to actually confront her own so-called impotency. She's considered barren, and all sorts of, that's where the godly culture comes into place, where you have to pray to God for you to grant a son. When reproduction is at the basis of this animates into becoming a part of an established culture industry. The culture industry encourages. If you open your cinema, your television sets, your movies, or any forms of industry that would educate you about the ideal thinking, ideal life, it actually brings about the recent innovations of the heterosexual love that we have. And through that, what happens is caste effectively becomes a powerful cement in founding the edifice of a Brahminical patriarchal structure. Now, within the caste lenses, we have to understand that this is not unique to India. It was also possible in Mesopotamia and other, where women, and it is important, that's where it comes to the sexual control, women had economic autonomy. Even in the Rigvedic times, they had economic autonomy. Only thing they did not have was control on their own sexuality. That was totally controlled under men. Men could dictate what a woman's sexuality looks like, thinks like, and feels like. And it was already prescribed as to how a woman should feel in her own sexual bodies. And to give an evidence of this, during the Rigvedic time, especially after the Aryans came into India, the Aryan women had the possibility of owning slaves. They owned the lower caste slaves. And slave was an economy. And through this economy, the Aryan woman, the upper caste woman, could not only own the slaves, but she could exercise her authority upon them. Now, when she was exercising authority upon them, she could also regulate how that slave economy would continue. But she could not engage in the aspect, in miscegenations. There was a strict control, and this was because of the upper caste anxiety, upper caste male anxiety. To control that, what they did was, they created this negative characterization of a, quote, lower caste men. And lower caste men couldn't spend much time with upper caste women. It was not only confined to lower caste men, it was also the men from their own families. According to Manusmriti, in again chapter 9, Manu says that a woman should not be alone with any male, including her own family members, her brother, her son, or her spouse. Even there is a confusion as to how she should be. She should always be constantly watched, and she cannot be trusted. It's not the male who are predators, but it is the woman who could be a potential, threat in invoking this. Now, let's consider the protection of women, or the protection of wife. Where does it come from? Women need protection. Considering the higher duty of all caste, even weak husbands, which again is a term where there were no weak husbands, they were all strong husbands. Husbands are always strong. But even here in this case, if there is a case of weak husbands, they must strive to guard their wives, guarding their wives, protecting their wives, becoming the stealth against any kinds of oppression was something that was granted to men. And what did they do is, as we see, by a girl, by a young woman, or even by an aged one, nothing must be done independently, even in her own house. So when we say guarding, it's not necessarily guarding or protecting her, but to keep and watch on every activities of the woman who is actually inside the house. Even inside the house, confined within the four walls, she is not independent and she is not free. She is not protected under these four walls. Manusmriti's chapter 5, verse 148 says, in childhood, a female must be subjected to her father. Now, when we say she's subjected to her father, if we unpack that, there was rape committed by the fathers upon their own daughters. And I think the subjection, the subjugation, the submission to the fatherly figure was again part of this, the vulgarized sexual enterprise that was happening within the family members only. And to control the purity of caste, many times they married amongst themselves, they reproduced amongst their own selves. That's why we see Brahma, for example, his daughter is Saraswati, and Saraswati is also his wife. So this is the kind of paradox they come about, and I think this is always regulated to always constantly retain the purity of the caste. And so once a woman and a man are married together, what it is like the end of life for both, but not necessarily for your husband. Chapter 9, verse 45 says, the husband is declared to be one with wife, which means that there could be no separation once a woman is married. So it's a woman who has to be married now. And if woman is married, then there is no separation. What about a man who is married? Does he have the same permission to go beyond and not remain confined to the marriages? Woman was a property. She was constantly traded in the age-old times. And for example, Manu, when he made woman a property, he made her a slave which could be transacted. And again, chapter 9, verse 416 says, a wife, a son, and a slave. These three are declared to have no property. The wealth which they earn is acquired for him whom they belong, which means the man owns now. And an interesting text that comes forward to us is, this is where even I am part of this this big regime, where it says, and again Manu says, especially in the Satpatha Brahmana, who declares this, that a woman, a Shudra, a dog, and a crow are embodiments of untruth, sin, and darkness. So now if you see how they are tied in the same line, a woman is equivalent to a Shudra, a dog, and a crow. I don't know why crow is there. Similarly, the Shudra is equivalent to the subjugated woman, and a dog who can be domesticated, who is your pet, who follows, and who is again a crow. Crow, in some traditions, crow is considered inauspicious because of the black crow and darkness. And then again, dogs, immediacy with Shudras. And I think that's why the animality granted to these two bodies gives permission for one to invoke violence. And that's why every week we have 21 Dalit women getting raped. Because this characterization that if she transcends her boundaries, she receives two things. One is punishment in the form of her wage, her salary, or her job is gone. Second is punishment for transcending the boundaries of caste and sexuality is by receiving violent rape. To protest against any form of Dalit women's autonomy, the rape is an actual punishment which alongside goes with cutting every other aspirations and every other prospects that a Dalit woman has in this space. Now, when we think about Brahminical patriarchy, to sum this up, one important thing I think we should bear in mind is the regulation of Dalit women as opposed to Dalit men. Because Dalit woman remains in the Brahminical patriarchal structure the most oppressed within the hierarchical ladder. Because even within the structures, the Dalit male would have significant advantages as compared to the Dalit woman. That's why I argue she remains 4 times oppressed. I mean, of course, because of her gender. Second, because of her class, because of her poverty. Third is a location. What location she is placed in social, in spatial locations, especially in villages, and you can see how it continues to inflict. And fourth is her sexuality. These remain undiscussed, and this doesn't become part of a mainstream political discourses. But if you see historically, the celebration of women's bodies was done by women belonging to the lower castes. To control that, what they did was they created new myths that celebrated the murder of native or Dalit women, Adivasi or Dalit women. Holika, celebration of Holi, is an example of this. Holika, again, is a story of a native woman who was, again, in the Hindu text, is Asura. Asura, or the demons in the Hindu text, are the Dalits and Adivasis. So when we describe Devas, or the gods, or the lords, are the people who belong to the upper caste. So the upper caste grant themselves the status of God, and the people protesting against the oppression and colonization of the Hindu order are called demons. So the celebration of Asuras, their death, it becomes part of festivities. And that's why we have not yet investigated much as to what is at the crux of celebration of Hindu festivals. Who is it celebrating? Is Columbus Day celebration of Columbus? Or is it celebration of massacre of the indigenous Americans? These are the questions that remain buried under the decolonial enterprise. Even the decolonial elites in India most likely came from Brahmins or the upper caste, didn't pay attention to these histories of Dalit and Adivasis and other backward caste lived as social and political cultures. So, to control the sexuality of women, one of the many other measures what they did was to constantly ask her to reproduce with the same man. And women had to always stand to the test of the purity. That's why erstwhile when one woman could exercise polygamous relationship, she could have multiple partners. One of the example is Draupadi in Mahabharata, who was sleeping with 5 brothers, the Pandavas, and they would take turns and they would have her, and it was present as a harmonious society, and Draupadi is celebrated. We all know the story. But then if you take the example of in the Ramayana, where Rama and Sita, conundrum comes to front of us, where Sita is abducted, of course, by Ravana and taken, and they're away for so long, and then now Sita has to prove her purity test. Oh, the question from our side is, what about Ram? You were also alone. When are you undergoing purity test? But the same is not granted. And by making Sita suffer through the torturous ordeal of purity test, they establish a new godliness, a new purity, a new spiritual experience for a woman to constantly undergo the meritorious testing of one's purity. And that purity testing was done through various measures. The priests in the order were the ones who were constantly seeking for free sexual favors. That's why the concept of dasa means slaves. When slaves were given, when slaves were abducted, these were the priests who wanted to exercise their sexuality or their various sexual authority upon. And if you are having a sexual control upon someone's body, you control the community, especially if you are coming from a closed door community. That's why even today in certain communities, Dalit women, when they are married, they are forced to sleep the first night with the landlord or the priest, even before sleeping with their own husband for the first night. And by doing that act, what it does is it shames the man for the lack of honor, that I slept with your wife, you have no authority to even look at me in the same eye because I have insulted you. And 2, it is to constantly then say that I have the idea of bhog, I have consummated this woman, this spouse from this family. So I have gained an advantage. So the priests who are benefiting out of this created a system of sexual slavery called Devdasi. Dev is God, Dasi is slave, slave of God. Who are gods on earth according to the Hindu Dharma Shastras? Brahmins. Brahmins are devas. So the gods' slaves are actually Brahmin slaves. And the women who always belonged to the Dalit community were forced to send their young girls aged 5 to 6 into the temples, into the service of God. This was a forced custom. People have now tried to romanticize it by saying that, they voluntarily gave their daughters. Nobody gives their daughters to beasts for the sake of spiritual attainment. It was a forced practice. They had to give. It was a forcible practice. Similarly, it was happening in Nizam, but in a different sense, where young children were forced to give to the landlords, who would then use them as a labor and various kinds of things they did inside. So in the Devdasi culture, what it did was it granted the sexual gratification. So this woman who was raped constantly, and she was used as an instrument of entertainment for entertaining the gods, apsaras, and all kinds of new words they used to say that these were impressing the gods so that gods can shower blessings on all of us. So now that's why we need a Dalit woman to parade naked or to perform all kinds of acts that will help please our sensual desires, so God can be very kind to us. These very systems that imposed Devdasi, when the children were born, they were called Harijan. Hari means God, Jan, the children of God. That's why the term Harijan was bitterly opposed by Ambedkar and Dalits, that was given by Gandhi, who so condescendingly declared Dalits to be the Harijans. There's a history that kind of follows into this materiality of controlling Dalit women bodies. Now this custom, if you will think, has been in the past, you are wrong, you're mistaken. This tradition continues even today. And that's why in the intersectional struggles, when we think about liberation of any kinds of oppressed bodies who belong to a gendered identities, need to be squared through the Dalit women's perspective, because their experiences have never been part of the canon. They have been the proclaimers of exercising free sexuality. If you look at various temples, and we were discussing yesterday, especially Khajuraho and other temples, where you see same-sex love is being freely practiced and demonstrated. This autonomy was not granted to Brahmin women. It was only courageous Dalit women who wouldn't fall and controlled 100% by the Brahmins, because the Brahminical structure affected intimately Brahmin women the most. Yet, Brahmin women became complicit. Why did they become complicit? We have two reasons. One, they say consent and coercion. Consent because they were at least granted a superior status. They could at least have a Dalit working under them. They were happy. They were not worried that tonight they're going to go and get humiliated and the whole system is working against them. But they were happy because a Dalit man was under her control. And by having that control, she got the pleasures by exploiting the Dalit male body. And that could be any way. She used that body for her own sexual gratification, and then the lores go. Nobody talks about the consummation between a Brahmin or upper caste woman and a Dalit man in the spaces of undeniabilities. That theme is not explored. What happened to it's always an upper caste man raping a Dalit woman. But what about a upper caste woman raping a Dalit man? That doesn't fit into the insecure culture of upper caste male sensibility. And that's why that understanding doesn't come out. But within the Dalit public sphere and private sphere, this is a discussed thing. If you go into villages, if you talk about these things, you will get more nuances about that. Second, why did upper caste or Brahmin women accepted to the Brahminical Patriarchy was coercion. She was coerced. She was having no much authority and autonomy to declare herself. She couldn't do anything. If she had to protest, she had to go and jump into the funeral pyre, the burning pyre of her husband. The forms of protest were basically self-immolation. It was inviting torture upon herself. And I think through these various trajectories, we see Brahminical patriarchy continues to be animated. Now in contemporary times, Brahminical patriarchy as a term gets monetized, gets NGOized. In the neoliberal market framework, what it happens is instead of addressing the issues that sit at the cardinal, what is it? Where does it come from? We need to attack that instead of creating an avenues which we can organize 10 people and just discuss about it. It has become vulgar practice where hashtag Brahminical patriarchy has just become a fashionable term which is addressing the poor women's issue. We have raised money. We are asking for grants that we have to fight against this, and we've seen many organizations formed around this across the caste, across the spaces, where this same issue continued to be again exploited in a social media hashtag world, where hashtag again becomes another Manu doctrine. If Manu was today, he would have written a clause on social media, how hashtag could be used to be exploiting every other vulnerable body. And I think when think about these futures and collective identities, we need to operate into a formula that doesn't necessarily fit in any forms of traditional methods. It has to be more innovative. And I think the contemporary politics within the queer realm, the LGBTIQ+, and other alternative politics that is coming, especially from the ground up, especially from the Dalit, rural, urban, as well as middle class base, that is talking about new possibilities and new visions, which is tying to the materiality of their lived life. It's not just confined to the spiritual attainments of a certain order. I think this is something that is new within the anti-Brahminical patriarchy discourse. And that's why when we talk about Hinduism, we mask Brahminical patriarchy. If you have to talk at all about Hinduism, you have to talk about Brahminical patriarchy as a departing point. It is upon these civilizations of various Hindu orders have been built. It is upon the oppression of women. If women and Dalits are not oppressed, a caste society will not function. The oxygen of casteist society is the death of Dalit and women. It is the humiliation. And that's why women are still Shudras. The earlier women realize this, the better, or else they will be again participating into a project that is harming them, and they will harm the coming generations. Thank you.
So we want to thank you for that, and that was definitely diving into depths that I haven't been exposed to, and I think everyone is appreciating like how much nuance that the nuance you provided. But now we're going to open it up for questions, and so I do want to recognize the time that it is almost 6, but we can go over. So make sure that when you ask, is it just a few questions, and if just make sure you guys are not trying to repeat the same question. Yeah, and just be conscious that there's other folks who might have questions as well. So feel free to ask away. Back there.
For me?
Yes.
That's you. I heard you speaking a lot about like how this this framework is, into Indian and this society, and it comes off to me, very in line with capitalism. So how would you talk about like the Constitution, the Indian Constitution being a socialist constitution, and how does that how do you think that came? I haven't really worded this. How do you think that came about, or how does it go? How does it go against what the culture is there, or I'm not really sure how to word this, but if that makes sense to you, I can.
No, sure. See, the Constitution Assembly was very misogynist. The male members who were part of that, many were, almost majority were Brahmin male from across the region, and they had their own insecure sensibility. Some of them were progressive, but majority of them came from a very kind of retrograde mentality. And so when Constitution was being discussed, that's why it's very important to discuss Ambedkar through the concept of women liberation in India, because I think he pilots the progressive reforms that the Indian society so needed, and that's why, of course, in Constitution where the parity between gender is addressed very severely, but then he goes beyond that because he wants to legislate in the Constitution, and I think there's not much written on this. He couldn't do much because of the quorum of Constitution Assembly, where he had to follow many things he couldn't do. So what he did was, after the Constitution was implemented, he attempted to remedy those measures by bringing new legislations. And one of the most controversial legislation was Hindu Code Bill. Now, Hindu Code Bill, as one of the, Ramchandra Guha writes also about this in India After Gandhi book, and Ambedkar himself writes, and there are many people who wrote about how Ambedkar's tryst with Hindu Code Bill came about. It was basically granting, property rights, the right to divorce, as well as the woman basically was given that autonomy that was never granted to her ever on the Indian soil. And this was taken as an affront. Now, the people who proclaimed their progressivism, all these progressive Hindu organizations, none of them supported. Actually, the Shankaracharya of Dwarka, I think it's Dwarka, sent a letter that, nothing is purer and nothing is sacred than the Dharma Shastras. Why is this untouchable man trying to interfere into this? And I think there is a new book that came about describing the cartoons of Ambedkar's, and during Hindu Code Bill there are cartoons you will see where there is one famous cartoon where a Brahmin, pot bellied Brahmin is actually dancing on a woman, and Ambedkar is trying to liberate her, and the Brahmin is saying they are also online, you can look up, where he is actually, the Brahmin is saying you can, what are you doing? Another instance is Ambedkar is actually holding a hand of a woman and actually climbing hopefully hill, and there are many hands almost describing the like thorns, where this woman is like Indian woman who is actually he's taking her to a new path of liberation. And at one instance there is a very interesting cartoon where he is holding a hand of a little girl and he is taking a turn and there is a Brahmin who's waiting with an axe, trying to. So the reason I gave this anecdotes is because the idea of providing equality rights not only through franchising but through the practice within the family structures, as well as basically freeing her from all this the way we call chakravyuh, the circle. When this was not accepted, the Brahmin women bitterly protested against Ambedkar. They sent death threats to him. It was not only Ambedkar, Nehru as well received the flack. They said, one call was given that Pandit Nehru should perish, especially by the Brahmin women themselves. So they were acting against their own interest. And I think 4 years later, of course, Nehru being another Brahmin couldn't really make much inroads, and Ambedkar that's why resigned from the from his post as the law minister. He said, if this cannot help, if this new country cannot grant independence to women, I refuse to be part of anything that is going to reproduce age-old norms. And I think that's how he went into the history as someone who is probably the only person who resigned out of this important post for the rights of all women, not confined to one caste only.
All right. So you also have heard of a dowry system, right? So what's your thought on this? How this system is related to patriarchy or a beauty of the caste you talked about. So I was expecting you to talk about that too, but so.
You mean dowry?
Yeah.
See, dowry is looked both ways. In certain societies, dowry is given by females towards males, and some societies male family gives dowry to the females. And I think the economic aspect, that's why I say when marriage became as a commonly accepted norm, and there is one reading, why was marriage so necessary for a society where very much at one point it was not really relevant. When did it become very important? And I think to ensure that the person, whatever woman or man, remains attached to this family, there was this commercial, sexual commerce that took place. And this was basically to identify the loopholes within other, because if you have to control someone, you really need to tie the person through the commerce, through the materiality of that. That's why when the first slaves were happening, especially in the Rigvedic times, women were the slaves, first slaves, beyond anybody else, because that was how it tend to came about. And so in the caste dynamics, dowry plays a very important role to actually strengthen, because if you have to participate in transaction of exchange of two bodies, you need a mechanism that can allow it to happen. If you don't have a system, if you don't have a space that can allow it to happen, it won't happen. So that's why dowry played an important role to actually legalize, or even not even legalize, to normalize this practice of marriage within the subcaste. Because marriages don't usually take place within caste. They take place within subcaste. And I think that's why the whole anti-dowry movement that came about, where you don't burn your things, and that was basically transcending again the thing, because even if you marry within the caste, the money is central to this, the materiality is central to this. How do you overlook that? You couldn't overlook that, because money is so central to whatever you are doing. And that's why I said the market-oriented fetish of marriage and two bodies became like a family affair. And that's why family becomes an institution that rehashes every other time the existence of beyond dowry, which is a guarantee. Dowry is basically saying this woman will not run away with someone else because we have invested so much money. And same happens in the other way around. Of course, if you look through African societies and other societies where dowry is coming through different form, dowry is coming through, for example, counting of cattle, how many cattle you are giving and all. But again, it has a different reading, different connotation. In regard to Indian context, of when it comes to the regulation of caste, one aspect of other reading is to identify the loopholes that are existing where that could open up various other avenues for one to explore various possibilities of marriage. To control that, then the economic aspect becomes kind of interesting enough to then impose this kind of caste-centered marriages.
And at the same time, though, we must admit that that dowry has been historically an upper caste, upper class.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we, just
Yeah.
like sati, we have
Yeah.
to remember that these practices were not as widespread, nor were they understood to be part of culture. And there's a very complicated history, partly through British colonialism, partly through commercialization, new capitalism, which has entrenched them in communities which never had them before. So I think that's another, when people say this is Indian culture, then you have to take it with a pinch of salt about which part, who in Indian culture was actually doing this. Yeah. So.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you for that amazing talk. Since you've been talking about like the private family and the home as reproducers of caste, I couldn't help but think about sort of more complicated spaces in Indian urban life in particular, where private family life has not been quite so private. And so I'm thinking, for instance, of like the chawl, which has been a site of so much Dalit politics, Dalit writing. These are spaces where private life cannot necessarily remain private, and perhaps arguably can also be spaces where any kind of emancipatory politics can emerge. But of course, after neoliberal globalization, these are spaces that have become defunct. So I'm curious also about what kind of material sites and spaces you might think of today as maybe breaking or creating little openings in sort of the hegemony of like Hindu family life.
Could you maybe unpack a little bit of what you just said?
Sure, I can try. If you think about the chawl as a space where private life cannot really remain quite so private. Women are not protected in the home in the same way as they can be in an apartment, let's say. After neoliberal globalization, these are spaces that have been eclipsed by the development that has led to things like the high rise, right? So you don't have quite as much of a rich culture, political culture, emerging from places like the chawl. So given that that's the case, what are spaces that you see today that allow for a Dalit politics to emerge?
I think it's a very interesting question. I think it is in contrast to the urban kind of makeup of the new urbanization, which is creating another hierarchical edifice where one can go and adjust and how the feminist politics frankly takes place, and so I think we have to put that in contrast with chawl as opposed to agraharas, where Brahmin locales are also spread out, and how that function. And I think some scholars have written, I don't remember of them on top of my head, who have gone into the ethnographies of agraharas and how women, kind of Brahmin women especially, and Brahmin male kind of encountered this. So within the chawls, for example, I will talk about the Bombay case, especially in the labor activism of the Girni Kamgars, and so within the chawl, the assigned duty was not really assigned, meaning the odd job that you could pick up because you don't have a job at all, and I think that provided a certain autonomy for one to actually transcend into various spaces. You can historically and religiously, a woman should not go beyond the boundaries of the house. That's considered scandalous, and anything beyond I think Durba Mitra just published a book, Indian Sexual Life. In that, she talks about, especially the word of prostitute, or that is attached to Indian woman, is basically anyone beyond operating the framework of monogamous family is considered prostitute. And so that kind of continues to neoliberal impact continued to happen even in the Dalit bastis as well, where this new models of trying to go away and trying to protect one's posterity is to say, I don't do this kind of work, I don't do that, because the community, society gaze on Dalit woman who is stepping out of her house is usually a prostitute, or someone who is doing anti whatever activities. She is not, she's not fending for children, and all kinds of, but her economic necessity kicks in, and so for her to practice any kind of transgressions, she has to actually challenge this very idea. But that's why but then when she goes into this new high-rise towers, even to work or even as herself, she is an untouchable there. For example, I was speaking at the Women's College of Delhi, Miranda University, and the upper caste Baniya and Brahmin women professors were listening, and they started talking about their they call help. All this new, this upper class women, especially urban areas, have used these words help, and I just asked her to unpack what help means. What do you mean help? And basically servants. And then she started describing how she treats her maid in a very patronizing way, meaning she's trying to, oh, I'm doing a great job, look, this is what I'm doing. What she's doing is she is actually imposing the masculine attitudes look towards women in a very effective way. She's actually going into private spaces, and this woman, professor of Miranda College, is actually practicing this kind of without any accountability, and she doesn't feel accountable to this. And so when you interact with modern job, kaam wali, and these are all terms which are sexualized and then which eventually get pornified. Kaam wali, doodh wali, and these are basically attempted against the Dalit woman's freedom. So if you do any job, which and there was a news report where there were a lot of websites which came with this name, which was basically, I think, porn websites.
Yeah.
Which had, I don't know if they, but there was a huge, but what does it say is specific, does any, kaam wali, doodh wali, or any kind of vocation related kind of berating of a woman, do we see that same happening in the upper caste, upper class circles as to a Brahmin woman doing some specific job, for example? Her work is considered revolutionary. And I think this appropriation of Dalit women's creativity and labor by Brahmin women has been actually, and one of that thing you can see is in the performative art of tamasha in Maharashtra, for example, where the women who danced in the bazaars, because annual bazaar, where there were no Brahmin women, I mean, there were only Dalit women who would perform amidst, and this was an art, and they celebrated. But in modern context, when a Brahmin woman does the exact same thing on TV screen or somewhere else, she becomes the queen of that art form. And this is how appropriation of the original art form or culture kind of goes into it. And I think this is how it gets messed up when we think through the neoliberal framework, where that's why I critiqued the predatory NGOs who try to monetize Dalit women's oppression, and try to create this new social media kind of buzz or any kind of buzz to just usher new voices without doing anything concrete work, which is basically to try to tell we are superior, but how and in what way, and we don't get that answers.
Okay. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Suraj.
Thank you, Dave.
If you want any more food, I think there's some more.
There'll be a lot more.
Should probably arrange Thank you so much.
I want to write this copy for you. Thank you. What's your name?
My name is Ashna.
Ashna, such a pleasure.
I'm sorry I couldn't.
No, it's okay. I mean, it was the same thing.
I was really hoping to be on time.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.